Thank you so much. First, I must explain the title of my presentation today. In the journey that brought me here, I have found out two shocking truths. First, the staggering magnitude of healthcare harm that occurs in our country. Second, how much of that harm is absolutely preventable. Dr. Lucian Leap, the father of patient safety who could not be here today, taught us that up to 100,000 deaths occur each year in this country due to healthcare harm, and making it the 8th leading cause of death. And that was in 1999. Now that's the equivalent of more than 10 747 jumbo jets full of Americans going down each and every week. And when you add infections into the mix that people get in hospitals, it doubles that number. That means that now 20 jumbo jets are going down a week, making healthcare harm the 3rd leading cause of death in America. Yet this epidemic is invisible. It is spread over thousands of hospitals and happens quietly and insidiously. The public is unaware, and many of our healthcare leaders are unaware of this. Now that's the bad news. Now the good news is even more shocking. In my journey, I have found that America has the means to dramatically reduce preventable harm to almost zero. However, the public, the policymakers, and most healthcare leaders are unaware of this, which I find absolutely amazing. So my mission today is to drive awareness of the shocking amount of harm that we have, that we can prevent. My message is a call to action. I have found the role that I can play, and it is to partner with the best experts and drive awareness of what we can do if we act now. I will succeed today if I enlist your help in the media to help us drive action through awareness. Awareness of both the harm and the opportunity to save countless lives. Now, stories have power, and you are storytellers. We need you. We need you to tell the stories of the success, not just the dramatic stories of harm. Awareness is more than just knowing. It's about feeling the pain and suffering of the victims of healthcare harm and their families, for they're more than just statistics. And feeling the inspiration from great stories of great role models who can inspire us to action. Real healthcare reform is impossible without dramatically cutting preventable harm. It will save lives, save money, and restore the sacred trust between patients and caregivers. Zero harm is the number, and now is the time. All the leading experts are teaching me this. My story, the story that brought me here today, was the near catastrophic medication accident of our twins, T-Boone and ZG, as we call them. Until then, I had heard my share of medical horror stories, but they were mostly secondhand, and I myself had my portion of typical hospital stays. But I always had faith that I was in a safe place, faith that the doctors and nurses and the pharmacists, they knew what they were doing and that they never made mistakes. I had the confidence that I would live to see another day because, after all, the reason that I was in the hospital to begin with wasn't life-threatening. But little did I know how dangerous any hospital can be. And let me tell you this right off, that I'm not here to denigrate doctors, nurses, pharmacists, any caregivers. I revere them, I really do. They have dedicated their lives to curing the sick and easing human suffering. And they're overworked, underappreciated, but they're also human, and all humans make mistakes. I have now learned that the overwhelming majority of healthcare harm is due to failure of the systems that support them. We don't have bad people. We have bad systems. Our support systems have just not caught up with the complexity of care. And the good news is we can fix them. Now, on their 10th day of life, our twins were admitted to hospital with infections requiring intravenous antibiotics. Now, while my wife and I were in the room, a nurse unintentionally gave our children 1,000 times the dosage of a dangerous blood thinner called heparin. Unaware of what just had happened, Kimberly and I were exhausted, and our children appeared to be safe, so we went home to get some rest. But we had no way of knowing that the potentially lethal quantity of heparin in their tiny bodies was turning their blood to the consistency of water. That night, incredibly, another injection, 1,000 times the intended dose, was administered to our precious children. At about 9 o'clock that night, my wife, Kimberly, was suddenly struck with a hammer blow of overwhelming dread. She became inconsolable, and she was crying out with a mother's intuitive certainty that our babies were in trouble. They're passing, I remember her saying. So I called the nurses station, and we were told that the twins were fine. But the twins were not fine. In fact, they were fighting for their lives. They were bleeding out of every place they'd been poked or prodded. Their now water-thin blood had the real possibility of hemorrhaging through a vein or artery, causing massive brain damage or failure to one of their vital organs. And our babies could have died that night, and we would not have been there for them. And the next day was probably the most frightening day of Kimberly's and I's life. It was spent caring for our infants who were still bleeding profusely and severely bruised from internal bleeding. They were both screaming in pain, and God only knows what they were feeling. At one point, as the doctors tried to clamp a bleeding wound in the remnant of T-Boone's umbilical cord, blood spurted 6 feet across the room and splattered on the wall. And the twins bled all day. Although they were given an antidote for heparin, their bleeding and lab tests remained off the charts all day and well into the night. Kimberly and I did a lot of praying. And finally, after 41 hours, their coagulation levels dropped into the normal range. T-Boone and ZG had survived, apparently with no damage. And that's the good news. How had this happened? The answer became all too apparent after interviewing the doctors and nurses. We discovered that the similar labeling on the vials of high-dose and low-dose medication is what led to the overdose of our twins. Further, the same error happened in Indianapolis the year before, causing 3 tragic deaths and injuries to a number of children. I am pleased to report that the twins are doing fine. I firmly believe that this was due to a lot of praying by a lot of people who heard about our twins' plight in the media, and I'm sure a lot of you are here in this room because it was, we could definitely feel it, and I really appreciate that. But I believe there was a reason. Thank you. I believe there was a reason that this near tragic incident happened to us. Through these precious children and their story was the opportunity to turn lemons into lemonade by helping prevent something similar happening to someone else's kids or loved ones. Now, after the event, Kimberly and I started the Quaid Foundation and carefully began to learn about patient safety. Along this journey, I met Dr. Charles Denham, who introduced me to leading experts in safety and helped us understand that the real sweet spot or safety envelope for high-performance care is the intersection of 3 systems: leadership, safe practices, and technology. When these support systems are functioning within the right organizational culture, we get great care and we get safe care. So, if the job is to accelerate the development of great leadership, adopt safe practices, and implement technologies, as well as creating an organizational culture that will support these systems, how are we going to do this? And what role must I and you in the media play? Well, what if we had consensus around the practices that leaders could implement at all U.S. hospitals? Well, we already do. The National Quality Forum has a special designation by the United States Congress to develop measures, standards, and practices, and I am honored to have its CEO, Janet Corrigan, at the head table sitting to my right. The Safe Practices for Better Healthcare being released today, in fact, by the NQF is a blueprint for leaders. These practices address the most common areas of preventable harm, including medications, infections, and testing. They include adoption of technologies like computerized prescriber order entry, or CPOE, and a flight simulator to measure its effectiveness. They target harmful events the government calls hospital-acquired infections that we understand are already built into the healthcare incentives. Immediate action, however, will require courageous leadership. Now, safe practices are standardized methods with predictable results. All humans make mistakes. Human error combined with systems failures causes the majority of harm due to medical accidents. I'm an actor. If I make a mistake, I have take 2, or 3, or 4, or 37, and believe me, I've been there. But if a caregiver makes a mistake, it could mean somebody's life. Hospital staff, more often than not, are working without a safety net, working sometimes double shifts, and they are expected to make crucial decisions with clarity and judgment for every patient in their care, often without any backup except for maybe the overworked caregiver working beside them. Practices like checklist reduce the possibility of error and harm. Now, once you have engaged leaders and standardized practices, enormous power can be delivered through innovative technologies. Healthcare needs more of what the airline industry figured out long ago: safety-centered design and technological backup for human factors-related error. The innovative instruments in modern airplanes are essentially a safety net to aid a pilot in flying an airplane safely even when conditions are zero visibility, and to alert him if he makes a mistake. And even the pilots with the right stuff, a personal career reference there, know that mistakes happen when they operate an aircraft outside of the safety performance envelope. Now, that envelope is defined by their own human performance and the airplane's technologies. Technologies like barcode systems, smart infusion pumps, electronic medical records, automated infection tracking, bedside barcoding, and CPOE all require investment and safe adoption, but they can have a huge impact on safety. A national approach at getting at zero healthcare harm will have to involve all stakeholders, and they are getting involved. Dr. Alan Korn, who is sitting before me, is leading national Blue Cross Blue Shield safety programs to activate hospital boards, invest in developing leaders, and pursuing programs to reduce central line infections. Dr. Howard Koh, Assistant Secretary of Health, sitting to my left at the head table, is pulling the leaders of the government together to dramatically reduce healthcare harm and prevent illness. And Dr. Don Wright, his Deputy Assistant Secretary sitting before me, is leading the charge on healthcare-associated infections for the entire government. So I am at a waypoint in my journey. We have merged our Quaid Foundation into TMIT in order that I can more effectively play my role of helping drive awareness of the opportunity to truly chase zero harm, along with more than 3,100 hospitals and 500 experts that work with them. It is time to make a call to action to encourage policymakers to tie the NQF safe practices to healthcare reform, challenge hospital leaders to adopt them, and ask the public to demand them. On April 20th, I will be speaking to leaders from around the world at a global patient safety summit in Nice, France, where we will premiere a documentary entitled Chasing Zero, Winning the War on Healthcare Harm, co-produced by Discovery Channel and TMIT. David Schlotterbeck, CEO of CareFusion, and Chara Guglielmi, President of AORN, the Association of Perioperative Registered Nurses, are leaders of the educational sponsors of this film, and they are here today as well. Our documentary uses patients and caregiver stories to demonstrate that zero harm is within reach. It provides examples of chasing zero role models that will inspire and encourage others. We even have stories of some of the unsung heroes of patient safety, like cleaning staff who develop checklists to reduce infections, and medical students from around the world who, through their Check a Box, Save a Life program, are already saving lives even before they get their MD. After the documentary airs on Discovery, we will give it to every hospital board of directors in the country, and it will become a continuing education program for caregivers. Looking forward to the future, we envision engaging those from industries like aviation, interested in helping us accelerate the development of our leadership, safe practices, and technologies to speed our learning curve. Experts like John Nance, an aviation and media expert who, like many other experts, believe we can learn a great deal about patient safety by applying the disciplines of safety in the aviation industry, such as the creation of the NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board, and applying safe practices such as simulation and teamwork training, as well as the use of technologies that protect us from human error. Now, where we need your help, you in the media, is helping us tell stories. Stories can unify the head and the heart and put our leaders' hands to work. In our article entitled Story Power, The Secret Weapon, we addressed how stories can have impact in activating the inner David of our healthcare leaders to attack their Goliath, which is fear. Fear of failure, fear of malpractice, fear of shame, that they might indeed have a bigger problem than they realized. So my ask of you is to help us tell not just the stories of harm, but the stories of great caregivers and organizations who live in that high-performance envelope of leadership, safe practices, and technology, dedicated to safe, high-performance care. The great organizations and people who can help America push the envelope and make the zone of safe care bigger for all of us and our families will prove to be those who truly have the right stuff. And many of you are in this room today, and we thank God for your dedication. And thank you all for inviting me here to speak today. Thank you.